Hello, everybody. We are now live with our spooky stories for 2023. And we're going to start with a Halloween tree that is by Susan Montanari with pictures by Teresa Martinez. So here we go. Are you ready out there? The Christmas tree farm bustled with excitement. Carols played as families moved up and down the row of tall pine trees, exclaiming, "This one is beautiful!" or "That one is perfect." Looking at the fancy decorated trees at the front, one sapling grumbled, "I don't like lights, I don't like decorations, and I don't like people." As trees disappeared off the lot, the little tree mumbled, "I don't want to be a Christmas tree, and I never want to leave this spot." Right, there they are. The little tree listened as the other saplings buzzed with anticipation. "I can't wait," a sprout whispered. "Oh, colored lights," one sighed. "I hope I get a star on top," said another. The little tree grumbled, "I don't want to become a Christmas tree, and I'm not going to." And there he is. As the little tree grew, its limbs became gnarled and twisted. And every time needles sprouted, thoughts of being decorated with lights and ornaments made them turn brown and fall off. The tree looked nothing like the others. One day, all the trees on the lot disappeared, all except for one. Eventually, houses began to appear, and with houses came families. By then, the tree had grown tall and broad. Its limbs were twisted and covered with strange knobs. One summer, the tree heard children's voices coming near and scoffed, "Oh, people." "Yikes!" a boy named Ben cried. "That tree looks grumpy." And it does look pretty grumpy, doesn't it? "I like it," his sister Sarah said as she touched a branch. "It's so creepy, I dare you to climb it," their friend Thomas challenged her. Sarah pulled herself up into the tree and sat on a cozy bough. "It's a pirate ship," she shouted. "Can everyone out there be a pirate for me?" "Yeah, I hope you guys are being better pirates at home than they are in the studio." She shouted and waved for the others to join her, and all the children climbed aboard. When the neighborhood kids needed a hideout, the tree became their fort. When they played astronauts and aliens, it was their spaceship. And one foggy day, the tree even turned into a dragon. Can I hear dragon noises? Rah, right? When winter came, a cold wind blew, and the children didn't come outside to play. The tree, with its limbs empty, stood all alone. On a snowy afternoon, the tree watched as Sarah and Ben's father carried a large bundle into the house. That night, a Christmas tree appeared in the window. "I don't like lights, I don't like decorations, and I don't like people," the tree whispered. But it couldn't turn away. The next year, the same thing happened. The kids played in the branches until the snow began to fall. And the tree wished for lights, decorations, and people, things it had never wanted before. One spring, the tree tried to make its needles grow properly, but after years of trying to stop them, they came in looking all wrong, and by summer, they had fallen off. A few months later, Sarah and Ben's parents were decorating for Halloween. Their father looked across the yard and said, "That is one horrible old tree." "Oh, we should cut it down," their mother agreed. Not now, the tree thought. Not now that my limbs are full of happy children. And see all the kids in the tree? Up in the branches, Sarah whispered, "No, they can't. We have to save our tree," Thomas cried. "I know what to do," Ben said, and whispered his plan to the other kids. They climbed down and raced away to gather supplies. And there they are in the tree. When they came back, Ben was already up in the tree, wedging a huge jack-o'-lantern in a nook. They all climbed up. Can everybody climb up for me from home? And from the tree's branches, they hung white and orange lights, cobwebs made from string, rubber spiders, cardboard cats and bats, ghosts, witches, and skeletons. That night, the parents and all the neighbors gathered to admire the tree. The children danced beneath it and shouting, "Trick or treat," and shouting to one another. Can everyone dance for me at home too? "I guess I was wrong," the tree said. "I do like lights. I do like decorations. And I do like people. I love being a Halloween tree." And there's our Halloween tree. And our pictures were by Tessa Martinez. And that is the Halloween tree. So thanks for listening. I'm hoping someone in the studio is going to come read next. It is Mr. John Vickers Jones. So let's give him a big round of applause. Yay!
Hello. Isn't it cold out? You know what? I used to hear people say, "Don't go into the woods at Halloween because the ghostly trees will get you." I told them not to worry. Trees are trees and they won't get anyone. And then I discovered the true story about the Ghost Eye tree. There. It's written by Bill Martin Jr. and John Archambault. It's true. They saw it. Let me read it to you, and maybe you'll keep out of the woods. One dark and windy autumn night, when the sun had long gone down, Mama asked my sister and me to take the road to the end of the town to get a bucket of milk. Oh, I dreaded to go. I dreaded that tree, the one-eyed ghostly tree. Why does Mom always make me go and get the milk? Look, there's our house. She's asking me to go and get the milk. Come on, Trady Cat, my sister said. She's all right. Don't hang back. I told her I wasn't hanging back. I was getting my hat. Oh, that dumb hat of yours, she said. It's too big for you. Makes you look silly. Well, you don't have to wear it, I said. No, but I have to look at it, my sister said. Then I said, look the other way. Look, don't you think it's a nice hat? That's me. Yeah. So we set off through the woods. It was dark, dreadfully dark. And to the end of the town, and for the halfway tree, the Ghost Eye tree. It was feared by all, the great and the small, who walked the road to the end of the town. Ah, what's the matter now? She said. It's my hat, I said. It slipped off. You're afraid, that's what. No, I'm not, I said. I'm getting my hat. That's me getting my hat. And as we neared the tree, our walk slowed down a bit. Halfway down to the end of the town, hiding what we feared the most, pretending there would be no ghost. pretending not to be afraid. Oh, there's nothing to fear, she said. There's nothing here but an old oak tree. No, nothing here, I said. There's nothing to fear. There's an old oak tree. But we ran past the tree as fast as we could. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Oh, we felt so good. And then we started to sing. There's no such thing as a ghostly tree. There's no such thing as a ghost. It's only a dream, my sister said. It's only a folly inside your head. There's nothing to dread. And we danced past the ghostly tree. There we are, dancing on the way to get the milk. What fun. No ghost. Then on the way back, I pulled my hat down over one eye and I looked tough. Like Bill Barber in the movies. I'm tough. What? My sister said. I didn't say anything. Yes, you did too. You were muttering to yourself. I was not. And then push up your hat, she said. You look silly. Oh, how glad we were, how free to be walking the road at the end of the town, halfway to the ghostly tree. My sister and I had passed it by, and the road led down to the end of the town, where we got a bucket of milk. It wasn't a very big bucket, but it was enough for us. "Ah, that's a fine hat you got there," said Mr. Cowlander, the milkman. I smiled. "To make good a milk bucket," said Mr. Cowlander. My sister laughed. I didn't. Nobody's going to put milk in my hat, I said to myself. "What you say?" Mr. Cowlander said. I didn't say anything. No. "Yes, you did. You were muttering again." "Mr. Cowlander, that hat makes him crazy. It's a crazy hat." "Well, come on. Help me carry the milk." There's Mr. Cowlander laughing at me and my hat. Jolly fellow. Not. Then I carried my milk. Then I gave it to my sister to carry home to the end of town. Well, we couldn't walk fast because the milk slowed us down walking home from the end of the town. How dark. How dread. "Hurry up," she said. "We're halfway home." "Oh, what's that?" "I didn't hear anything." "I heard something. I really heard it. Let's go back to Mr. Cowlander's." No, she said. "There's nothing here, nothing to fear." Oh, why does Mama choose me to go and get the milk and walk past that tree? Look, the halfway tree, the ghost-eye tree. It turned its head and looked at me. The halfway tree! It's the ghostly one. Oh, no. I'm scared. Oh, no. We ran. My sister and I, we ran as fast as we could, all the way home as fast as we could. We set the bucket down, flopped it on the ground, gasping for breath. And then I said, "I've lost my hat. I dropped it by the tree." Well, my sister, up she jumped and took to the road that led through the town to the halfway tree and ghost-eye tree, where my hat lay fallen on the haunted ground. Ellie, come back," I said. "Ghost-eye will get you. He's right by your side." But faster than foolish that flashed through your mind, Ellie come back, leaving the ghost-eye tree behind. There she is running. Isn't she a good girl? I kind of like my sister now. "Here's your dumb hat," she said. "Makes you look silly." It doesn't. It's a beautiful hat. I put it on my head and pulled it down over one eye to look through like Mike Barber in the movies. I'm tough, I said to myself. Real tough. I ain't afraid of no ghostie. But since that dread night at the halfway tree, when Ghost-Eye tried to frighten me, by some lucky chance, I'm never around when Mama wants milk from the end of town. I'm hiding every time she calls me to get some milk. My hat doesn't look silly, does it? I'm going to put it over one eye. I'm tough too. Bye-bye. Happy ghostries.
Dead air! Oh no!
Yay!
Everybody give me noise! Who's up next?
What's on first?
Who's coming? Seriously.
Oh, right.
Hello, everyone, and sorry about that. So we're going to get someone up. What do we have next? Caroline, did you find a short story?
Well, it's this short.
Okay, we're not sure. How about back there? Do we have a short story?
Like how short is short?
Ralph, are you ready?
I think so.
Okay, we're actually going to go to a Ray Bradbury story, and we're going to do one chapter of The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. So come on down.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm going to be reading chapter 5 from Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree. The pumpkins on the tree were not mere pumpkins. Each had a face sliced in it. Each face was different. Every eye was a stranger eye. Every nose was a weirder nose. Every mouth smiled hideously in some new way. There must have been 1,000 pumpkins on this tree, hung high and on every branch, 1,000 smiles, 1,000 grimaces, and twice times 1,000 glares and winks and blinks and leerings of fresh-cut eyes. And as the boys watched, a new thing happened. The pumpkins began to come alive. One by one, starting at the bottom of the tree, and the nearest pumpkins' candles took fire within their raw interiors. This one, and then that, and this, and then still another, and on up and around. 3 pumpkins here, 7 pumpkins still higher, a dozen clustered beyond, 100, 500. 1,000 pumpkins lit their candles, which is to say, brightened up their faces, showed fire in their square or round or curiously slanted eyes. Flame guttered in their toothed mouths. Sparks leaped out their ripe-cut ears. And from somewhere, 2 voices, 3 or maybe 4 voices, whispered and chanted a kind of sing-song or almost an old sea shanty of the sky and time and the earth turning over into sleep. The rain spouts blew spider dust. It's big, it's broad. A voice smoked from the rooftop chimney. It's broad, it's bright, it fills the sky, All Hallows Night. From open windows somewhere, cobwebs drifted. The strangest sight you've ever seen, the monster tree on Halloween. The candles flickered and flared. The wind crooned in. The wind crooned out the pumpkin mouths, tuning the song. The leaves have burned to gold and red. The grass is brown, the old year dead. But hang the harvest high, oh, see the candle constellations on the Halloween tree. Tom felt his mouth stir like a small mouse wanting to sing. The stars they turn, the candles burn, and the mouse leaves scurry on the cold wind borne, and a mob of smiles shine down on thee. From the gourds hung high on the Halloween tree. The smile of the witch and the smile of the cat, The smile of the beast, the smile of the bat, the smile of the reaper, taking his fee, all cut and glimmer on the Halloween tree. Smoke seemed to sift from Tom's mouth. Halloween tree. All the boys whispered it. Halloween tree. And then there was silence. And during the silence, the last of the triples and quadruples of All Hallows Tree candles were lit in titanic constellations, woven up through the black branches and peeking down through the twigs and crisp leaves. And the tree had now become one vast, substantial smile. The last of the pumpkins now were lit. The air around the tree was Indian summer breathing warm. The tree exhaled sooty smoke and raw pumpkin smell upon them. Gosh, said Tom Skelton. Hey, what kind of place is this? Asked Henry Hank, the witch. I mean, first the house, that man, and no treats, only tricks, and now I never saw a tree like this in my life. Like a Christmas tree, only bigger, and all those candles and pumpkins. What's it mean? What's it celebrate? Celebrate? A vast voice whispered somewhere, perhaps in a chimney soot bellows, or perhaps all the windows of the house opened like mouths at the same moment behind them, sliding up, sliding down, announcing the word celebrate with breathings out of darkness. Yes, said the gigantic whisper, which trembled the candles in the pumpkins. Celebration. The boys leaped around, but the house was still. The windows were closed and brimmed with pools of moonlight. Last one in's an old maid, cried Tom suddenly, and a bond of leaves lay waiting like old fires, old gold, and the boys ran and dived at the huge, lovely pile of autumn treasure. And in the moment of diving, about to vanish beneath the leaves in crisp swarms, yelling, shouting, shoving, falling, there was an immense gulp of breath, a seizing in of air. The boys yelped, pulled back, as if an invisible whip had struck them. For coming up out of the pile of leaves was a bony, white hand, all by itself. And following it, all smiles, hidden one moment but now revealed as it slid upward, was a white skull. And what had been a delicious pool of oak and elm and poplar leaves to thrash and sink and hide in now became the last place on all this world the boys wanted to be. For the white bony hand was flying on the air, and the white skull rose to hover before them, and the boys fell back, colliding, sneezing out their air in panic, until in one wild mass they fell flat upon the earth and writhed and tore at the grass to fight free, scramble, try to run. Help! They cried. Oh, yes, help, said the skull. Then peal after peal of laughter froze them further as the hand upon the air, the bony skeleton hand, reached up, took hold of the white skull face, and peeled it down and off. The boys blinked once behind their masks. Their jaws dropped, though none could see them dropping. The huge man in dark clothes soared up out of the leaves, taller and still taller. He grew like a tree. He put out branches that were hands. He stood framed against the Halloween tree itself, his outstretched arms and long, white, bony fingers festooned with orange globes of fire and burning smiles. His eyes were pressed tight as he roared his laughter. His mouth gaped wide to let an autumn wind rush out. Not treat, boys, no, not treat. Trick, boys, trick, trick. They lay there, waiting for the earthquake to come, and it came. The tall man's laughter took hold of the ground and gave it a shake. This tremor passed through their bones, came out their mouths, and it came out in the form of still more laughter. They sat up amid the ruins of the thrashed-about leaf pile, surprised. They put their hands to their masks to feel the hot air leaping out in small gusts of echoing mirth. Then they looked up at the man as if to verify their surprise. Yes, boys, that was a trick. You'd forgotten? No, you never knew. And he leaned against the tree, finishing out his fits of happiness, shaking the trunk, making the 1,000 pumpkins shiver and the fires inside to smoke and dance. Warmed by their laughter, the boys got up to feel their bones and see if anything was broken. Nothing was. They stood in a small mob under the Halloween tree, waiting, for they knew this was only the beginning of something new and special and grand and fine. Well, said Tom Skelton. Well, Tom, said the man. Tom, cried everyone else, is that you? Tom in the skeleton mask stiffened. Or is it Bob or Fred? No, that must be Ralph, said the man quickly. All of those, sighed Tom, clapping his mask hard in place, relieved. Yeah, all, said everyone. The man nodded, smiling. Well, now you know something about Halloween you never knew before. How did you like my trick? Oh, trick. Yes, trick. The boys were catching fire with the idea. It made all the good glue go out of their joints and put a little dust of sin in their blood. They felt it stir around until it pumped on up to light their eyes and stretch their lips to show their happy dog teeth. Yeah, sure. Is that what you used to do on Halloween? Asked the witch boy. This and more. But let me introduce myself. Mound Shroud is the name. Carapace, clavicle, Mound Shroud. Does that have a ring, boys? Does it sound for you? It sounds, the boys thought. Oh, it sounds. Mound Shroud. A fine name, said Mr. Mound Shroud, giving it a full sepulchral night church sound. And a fine night, and all the deep, dark, wild, long history of Halloween waiting to swallow us whole. Swallow us? Oh, yes, cried Mound Shroud. Lads, look at yourselves. Why are you, boy, wearing that skull face, and you, boy, carrying a scythe, and you, lad, made up like a witch, and you, he thrust his bony finger at each mask. You don't know, do you? You just put on those faces and old mothball clothes and jump out. But you don't really know, do you? Well, said Tom, a mouse behind his skull-white muslin. No. Yeah, said the devil boy. Come to think of it, why am I wearing this? He fingered his red cloak and sharp rubber horns and lovely pitchfork. And me, this, said the ghost, trailing its long, white graveyard sheets. And all the boys were given to wonder and touch their own costumes and refit their own masks. Then wouldn't it be fun for you to find out, said Mr. Moundshroud. I'll tell you. No, I'll show you. If only there was time. It's only 6:30. Halloween hasn't even begun, said Tom in his cold bones. True, said Mr. Moundshroud. All right, lads, come along. He strode, they ran. At the edge of the deep, dark night ravine, he pointed over the rim of the hills and the earth, away from the light of the moon, under the dim light of strange stars. The wind fluttered his black cloak, and the hood that half shadowed and now half revealed his almost fleshless face. There. Do you see it, lads? What? The undiscovered country. Out there. Look long. Look deep. Make a feast. The past, boys. The past. Oh, it's dark, yes, and full of nightmare. Everything that Halloween ever was lies buried there. Will you dig for bones, boys? Do you have the stuff? He burned his gaze at them. What is Halloween? How did it start? Where? Why? What for? Witches, cats, mummy dusts, haunts? It's all there in that country from which no one returns. Will you dive into the dark ocean, boys? Will you fly in the dark sky? The boys swallowed hard. Someone peeped. We'd like to, but Pipkin, we've got to wait for Pipkin. Oh, yeah, Pipkin sent us to your place. We couldn't go without him. As if summoned, in this instant, they heard a cry from the far side of the ravine. Hey, here I am, called a frail voice. They saw his small figure standing with a lit pumpkin on the far ravine ledge. This way, they all yelled. Pipkin, quick! Coming, was the cry. I don't feel so good, but I had to come. Wait for me. And if you want to know what happens after that, you'll just have to read the rest of the book.
Hello, and I will be reading Click Clack the Rattlebag by Neil Gaiman. Before you take me up to bed, will you tell me a story? Do you actually need me to take you up to bed? I asked the boy. He thought for a moment, then, with the intense seriousness, yes, actually I think you do. It's because I've finished my homework, and so it's my bedtime, and I'm a bit scared. Not very scared, just a bit. But it is a very big house, and lots of times the lights don't work, and it's sort of dark. I reached over and tousled his hair. I can understand that, I said. It is a very big old house. He nodded. We were in the kitchen where it was light and warm. I put down my magazine on the kitchen table. What kind of story would you like me to tell you? Well, he said thoughtfully, I don't think it should be too scary, because then when I go up to bed, I will just be thinking about monsters the whole time. But if it isn't just a little bit scary, then I won't be interested. And so, you make up scary stories, don't you? I know she says that's what you do. She exaggerates. I write stories, yes. Nothing that's been published yet, though. And I write lots of different kinds of stories. But you do write scary stories, don't you? Yes, I said. The boy looked up at me from the shadows by the door, where he was standing waiting. Do you know any stories about Click Clack the Rattlebag? I don't think so. Those are the best sorts of stories. Do they tell them at your school? He shrugged. Sometimes. What's a Click Clack the Rattlebag story? He was a precocious child and was unimpressed by his sister's boyfriend's ignorance. You could see it on his face. Everybody knows them. I don't, I said, trying not to smile. He looked at me as if he was trying to decide whether or not I was pulling his leg. He said, "I think maybe you should take me up to my bedroom, and then you can tell me a story before I go to sleep. But a very not scary story, because I'll be up in my bedroom then, and it's actually a bit dark up there too." I said, "Shall I leave a note for your sister, telling her where we are?" "You can, but you'll hear when they get back. The front door is very slammy." We walked out of the warm and cozy kitchen into the hallway of the big house, where it was chilly and drafty and dark. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. "The bulb's gone," the boy said. "That always happens." Our eyes adjusted to the shadows. The moon was almost full, and blue-white moonlight shone in through the high windows on the staircase down into the hall. "We'll be all right," I said. "Yes," said the boy soberly. "I'm very glad you're here." He seemed less precocious now, and his hand found mine, and he held onto my fingers comfortably, trustingly, as if he'd known me all his life. I felt responsible and adult. I did not know if the feeling I had for his sister, who was my girlfriend, was love, not yet, but I liked that the child treated me as one of the family. I felt like his big brother, and I stood taller, and if there was something unsettling about the empty house, I would not have admitted it for worlds. The stairs creaked beneath the threadbare stair carpet. "Click-clacks," said the boy, "are the best monsters ever." "Are they from television?" "I don't think so. I don't think any people know where they come from. Mostly they come from the dark." "Good place for a monster to come from." "Yes." We walked along the upper corridor in the shadows, walking from patch of moonlight to patch of moonlight. It really was a big house. I wished I had a flashlight. "They come from the dark," said the boy, holding onto my hand. "I think probably they're made of dark, and they come in when you don't pay attention. That's when they come in. And then they take you back to their, not nests. What's a word that's like nests, but not? House? No, it's not a house. Lair." He was silent. Then, "I think that's a word, yes, lair." He squeezed my hand. He stopped talking. "Right. So they take the people who don't pay attention back to their lair. And what do they do then, your monsters? Do they suck all the blood out of you like vampires?" He snorted. "Vampires don't suck all the blood out of you. They only drink a little bit, just to keep them going and, flying around. Click-clacks are much scarier than vampires." "I'm not scared of vampires," I told him. "Me neither. I'm not scared of vampires either. You want to know what a click-clacks do?" "They drink you," said the boy. "Like a Coke?" "A Coke is very bad for you," said the boy. "If you put a tooth in Coke, in the morning it will be dissolved into nothing. And that's how bad Coke is for you, and why you must always clean your teeth every night." I'd heard the Coke story as a boy, and had been told as an adult that it wasn't true, but was certain that a lie which promoted dental hygiene was a good lie, and I let it pass. "Click-clacks drink you," said the boy. "First they bite you, and then they go all ishy inside, and then your meat and all your bones go, and your brains and everything except your bones and skins turn into a wet, milkshakey stuff. And then the click-clack sucks it out through the holes where your eyes used to be." "That's disgusting," I told him. "Did you make it up?" We reached the last flight of stairs, all the way to the big house. "No." "I can't believe you kids make up stuff like that." "You didn't ask me about the rattle bag," he said. "Right. What's the rattle bag?" "Well," he said, sagely, soberly, a small voice from the darkness beside me. "Once you're just bones and skin, they hang you up on a hook, and you rattle in the wind." "So what do these click-clacks look like?" Even as I asked him, I wish I could take the question back and leave it unasked. I thought, huge spidery creatures, like the one in the shower this morning. I'm afraid of spiders. I was relieved when the boy said, "They look like what you aren't expecting, what you aren't paying attention to." We were climbing wooden steps now. I held onto the railing on my left, held his hand with my right as he walked beside me. It smelled like dust and old wood, that high in the house. The boy's tread was certain, though, even though the moonlight was scarce. "Do you know what story you're going to tell me to put me to bed?" he asked. "It doesn't actually have to be scary." Not really. Maybe you could tell me about this evening. Tell me what you did. That won't make much of a story for you. My girlfriend just moved into a new place on the edge of town. She inherited it from an aunt or someone, and it's very big and very old. I'm going to spend my first night here with her tonight, so I've been waiting for an hour or so for her and her housemates to come back with the wine and Indian takeaway. See, said the boy, there's a precocious amusement again. But all kids can be insufferable sometimes, when they think they know something that you don't. It's probably good for them. You know all that, but you don't think. You just let your brain fill in the gaps. He pushed open the door to the attic room. It was perfectly dark now, but the opening door disturbed the air, and I heard things rattle gently, like dry bones in thin bags, in the slight wind. Click-clack, click-clack, like that. I would have pulled away then, if I could, but small, firm fingers pulled me forward, unrelentingly, into the dark.
Well, hello. Tonight I'm going to read a story about a haunted house. A haunted house in Arkansas. So, in the town of Blakesley, Arkansas, there was a house that everyone knew was haunted. It was an old, neglected house on a side street in the oldest part of town. Now, sometimes the most wonderful smells issued from the house and filled the street with the heavenly odor of fresh baked bread. Whenever that happened, people would say that the old house must have been a bakery or, at the very least, the former home of a fabulous baker. Sometimes the neighbors would hear the sound of music and laughter coming from the empty house, as if there was a wonderful party in full swing. Well, whenever that happened, the neighbors would look at each other and say, "It sounds like a nice party. I wish I was invited." Whatever ghosts haunted the old house, they were benign and friendly ghosts. But even the friendliest spirits are scary, and no one ever actually went inside the house, with the possible exception of a young boy being dared by his playmates. No one ever even stepped foot on the front porch. But one day a man moved into town from a distant city. He saw the empty house and asked the neighbors who owned it. Oh, he was told the owner was unknown and that the property could be bought for back taxes. No one told the stranger about the house's curious history. The man went to City Hall and purchased the property. Soon after moving in, however, strange things began to happen. Odd noises in the night, weird lights drifting from room to room, the smells of baking from a cold kitchen, and worst of all, the sound of a party when the new owners were trying to sleep. After a few days, the man's wife declared that she could no longer live in so haunted a place and moved out, taking the children with her. Before long, the man gave up as well. He was forced to find another place to live. But he was angry at the neighbors for not warning him about the house's reputation. He was angry at the town board for not telling him that the house was occupied by ghosts. In fact, he was angry at everyone in the town for treating him so badly. So he went to the mayor to complain and see if he could get his money back. The mayor refused, saying he never misrepresented the house as anything it was not. Just because a house is haunted, he said, doesn't mean you can't live there. The trick is making friends with the ghosts and learning how to get along with them. So the man went to the pastor of the local church and told him his problem. The pastor said, "Well, you've been in town for a month, and only now, when you're having a problem, do you come and see me? Well, sit down and tell me what's on your mind." So the man sat and told the pastor about the haunted house he bought. Now, the pastor in this village was considered a wise man, set in his ways, conservative in his manner and beliefs. He wasn't open to new ideas, but reluctantly, he agreed to visit the house and see exactly what the man was talking about. The pastor accompanied the man to the house. As they approached the block the house was on, the pastor smelled a delicious smell. "What's that wonderful smell?" he asked. "It's the ghost baking bread," the man replied. When they got closer, the pastor stopped to listen. He turned to the man and inquired, "Oh, I hear music. Is that someone having a party?" "It's the ghost having a party," replied the man. They went inside and looked around the empty house. The pastor sat at a table while the man looked for something to serve his guest. He found an old bottle of whiskey and poured a glass for the pastor and one for himself. They toasted each other's health and drank. "So you moved from Little Rock to Blakesley?" said the pastor. "My parents live in Little Rock. I know the town well." The man, it turned out, knew some of the pastor's relatives. They talked and joked about those things they had in common and felt a friendship growing. They were having such a pleasant time that before they knew it, 3 hours had passed. They were gone so long the man's wife began to get nervous. "He went to the pastor's house hours ago," she said to herself. "Maybe the ghost got him." So she picked herself up and went to the pastor's house and introduced herself to the pastor's wife. Together, they pooled their misgivings about ghosts and their worries about their husbands and went to the haunted house together. They peeked in the windows and saw the two men sitting at a table drinking, laughing, and having a good time. The wives joined their husbands and found that they had so much to talk about. The laughing and talking attracted the neighbors who stopped by and introduced themselves. Well, pretty soon the kitchen was filled with the smell of cooking. A neighbor brought his fiddle and another brought his guitar, and just like that, there was a party. The old house filled with real smells and real laughter. It was alive again, and that, of course, was what it wanted all along. From that day to this, the old house came alive again, and its ghosts were laid to rest, never to be seen or heard of again. The end.
Hello. I will be reading from Gothic Tales by H.P. Lovecraft, The Terrible Old Man. It was the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Chanek and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the professions of the Messrs. Ricci, Chanek, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally keep him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of an East India clipper ship in his day. So old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted, so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most of the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk, who sometimes steal up to the house to peer in through the dusty panes. These folk say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles. In each, a small piece of lead, suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations as if in answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again. But Angelo Ricci and Joe Chanek and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard, who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow, whom everybody shunned, and at whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank, and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ricci, Chanek, and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman, whilst Mr. Chanek waited for them and their presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in Ship Street by the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds. Desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterwards. Messrs. Ricci and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon showed down upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work to make the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. So they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Chanek, as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously, he watched at the narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently, he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden? And had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Channock did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the wall inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man, leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Channock had never noticed before the color of that man's eyes, and now he saw that they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Ship Street, or certain especially inhuman cries, probably of a stray animal or migratory bird heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village, gossip, the terrible old man, took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth.
Going to read one that's a little more contemporary. This is called Selfies by Levi Tidhar. Photo number 733. In one of the last pictures I am running down the street and it is dark. The street lights are dim and the light oozes down sickly and yellow. I can feel my heart almost bursting in my chest, the taste of something sour and unpleasant in my mouth. I'm running as fast as I can. I have to get away. The moon is a sickle moon. Its cheek is pockmarked with acne scars. It looks down on me. It hangs overhead like a malformed knife. They're running behind me and they're gaining. They're not even running hard. They spread out around me. They match their pace to mine, easily, without effort. They whisper my name. Ellie. Ellie. Just ahead is the rusty iron gate to the old playground. I used to play on the swings when I was a little girl. They crowd me here. I don't know if kids still use the swings. I stumble through the gate and into the playground. I just have to keep running, but I take a picture then. I can't help it. It's just me and the gate and that sickle moon and no one at all behind me. I heard this story about a girl who went mad a few months ago. What girl? Her name was Ellie, and she was in my year at school. I didn't see much of her after that until they found her dead at the bottom of the old playground down my street one night a few months ago. Oh, I'm really sorry. That's all right. I really didn't know her that well. What was funny was when I saw her, it was only for a moment before they zipped up the bag and they took her away. It was her face. See, it was the scariest thing I ever saw, her face. Here, look. Just before they zipped her up, I took a photo. Look, that's disgusting. I didn't put it on Facebook or anything. Are those eyes? What is she doing with her mouth? I think she's screaming. She was still holding her phone when they found her, even though she was broken up pretty bad. My cousin Dan works in the lab, and he said there were thousands of pictures of her on her phone, thousands and thousands. He said the police could construct her last few months almost moment by moment just by following the pictures. They were mostly selfies, but some of them were pretty weird. Dan said maybe someone photoshopped them. After a while, they didn't even make sense. That's pretty vain, though, I guess. You know what the really weird thing was, though? What? Well, a couple of days later, I was in the supermarket, and I thought I saw her. She was standing in the aisle by the cereal shelves. She was talking on the phone. She was holding a box of Crunchy Nuts. I had this really queasy feeling when I saw her. I mean, it couldn't be her, right? Then it was like she knew I was standing there, and she turned and she gave me this smile. She had these uneven white teeth, and she had her hair in this sort of fringe. She used to be really pretty, but when she turned, she looked directly at me, and it was her eyes. They were like eggshells. No pupils or an iris. They were just entirely white and empty and flat, and she smiled. You're making it up. I had a can of Coke in my hand, and it fell down and burst open, and there was a mess. When I looked up again, she'd disappeared. Did you pay for the Coke? Yeah, I paid for the Coke. They buried her a few days later. I didn't go to the funeral. I mean, like I said, I never really knew her all that well anyway. Picture number 1. This is right after I buy the phone. The shop behind me has a sign that says previously owned. I don't know if that is the name or just a description, but it is accurate all the same. I'd gone to the mall just browsing. At the back of the lower level, all the way back, the shops turned dusty and dark. There's a baby clothes store that hasn't seen a baby in years, and a shop for vegan supplies, and a video store that's permanently shut. I'd not noticed this particular shop before. I go in, and it's filled with strange objects and all sorts of knickknacks, weird clockwork devices, creepy voodoo dolls, paintings of grotesque creatures like something on the cover of a paperback. And at first, I don't see anyone in the shop, but then I hear a cough, and this weird old guy with a long, kind of horse-like face and pale, watery eyes appears behind the counter, almost like he'd been somehow cut out of the shadows and given form and pushed into the light. He coughs again and says, "Can I help you, miss?" I say, "I'm just browsing," and I see his face frown in displeasure, and it makes me uncomfortable. "You're very pretty," he says suddenly, and I think I blush, and I shrug a little awkwardly. No, really," he says. "Thank you," I say. "Here," he says. He brings something out from behind the counter, and it's so startling in the shop among all the old and dusty objects. It's a brand new phone. "Do you have one?" he says. "A phone? A phone like this one?" No, I just have this old thing." "Then take this one," he says, "from me." "You mean for free?" "No," he says, and looks at me like I'm dim. "Of course not. I don't run a charity here." "Oh, I mean, very cheap," he says, pushes the phone at me aggressively. Take it. He scares me, so I take it, but as soon as I hold the phone, I feel better. It feels so warm and smooth, and it fits snugly into my palm. I swipe across the screen, and the icons blink back at me. I barely hear that awful man when he says the price, and like in a dream, I take out some money and I give it to him. He said I was pretty, but I guess I never thought of myself as pretty. I mean, I didn't give it much thought one way or the other. I step out of the shop, and suddenly there is light around me and air. My finger itches. I hold up the phone in front of me and press the camera button, and it's like something in me wakes up for the first time, and something inside me dies. I can't describe it. I don't need to. I press the button, and there's the image instead. Number 736. In the last picture, I'm dead. Number 112. Funny thing is, I go back to the spot where the shop was a few days later, and there is no sign of it. There's me standing with a Cinnabon behind me, and the guy behind the counter said it's been there for the past year. In the picture, I'm biting my lip and looking worried. I had to keep clicking. I had to keep taking pictures. But the pictures were beginning to lie. Number 447. That was amazing, Ellie, Noah says. He looks hopped up or something. He gives me this beaming smile. I say, what are you talking about? I snap a picture. Me standing there looking vaguely irritated in his kitchen. He has petunias on the windowsill. I don't like the way the light catches them. They look ill and the sunlight is blotchy. Last night, you were amazing, Noah says. I never even... He blushes. Where do you learn to do that? He whispers. Comes close and puts his arms around me, and I can smell him, the smell of sweat and sex. And I push him away, and I can feel the tears coming, even though I don't want to. And I say, but I wasn't here last night, Noah. Don't you remember? I went to the movies with Shelley, and I stayed at her place. He says, what? And his hands drop to his sides, and then he smiles and said, you're just messing with me. I burst into tears, and he stands there looking confused and then angry. And he comes to me again, and I push him away, and I run up the stairs to his bedroom and see the rumpled sheets and pinned to the mirror a photo. It must have been taken last night and freshly printed. And I am posing for the camera, naked, one hand suggestively between my thighs while the other is out of sight, holding the camera. In the picture, I'm grinning into the camera, and my teeth are a predator's teeth, and my eyes are... There is nothing in my eyes. And I pull the photo from the mirror, and I tear it up into tiny pieces that fall away at my feet. Number 73. Dinner with Mom and Dad and Noah. We're all smiling. Noah has his arm around me, and he's grinning stupidly into the camera, and so am I. I'm feeling like there's a fire inside me, burning from the inside out, like light falling on a negative. And it's reaching everywhere. It's touching everything with light. Number 501. Me in front of the mirror, but the picture is all wrong. This is after I left Noah's place and gone home. I'm crying as I press the button, but the me in the mirror is smiling. Number 210. This photo's a little blurry because I'm running. I'm on the street and a man is pursuing me. Number 209. Blurry as I turn away from the man who's still speaking. Number 208. He has a nervous, excited voice, and he keeps shouting about my phone. We're both caught in the photo, and for a moment, his face is both almost erotically excited and incredibly terrified. Number 207. A man approaches me in the street, but no, he's not in the photo. He wants to buy my phone. I can't really understand what he's saying. He's tall and thin with a straggly beard, and he smells as though he hasn't washed for a few days. He says his name is Farnsworth, and that he's a collector. He keeps asking me where I got my phone and do I know what it is. I tell him it's just a phone, but he doesn't really listen. He says something about mimic objects and parasite mechanics and things that don't look like things. Dark chamber, he keeps saying. Dark chamber, a camera obscura. I don't know what any of it means. I start to turn away from him. I think from the corner of my eye, I catch my reflection standing on the street corner, only there is no mirror there. Number 600. There is someone standing outside my house under the street lamp, but I don't dare look. It's so quiet. It's so quiet and nothing moves. Nothing moves, but I know it's there. The silence is like a living room or the echo of living things. It's like a dark chamber in my room, and the only illumination comes from outside. The light presses against the curtains. Something is standing outside under the lamp. I pull back the corner of the curtain and I don't look out, but I take a picture. In the picture, something with my face is standing outside, and it's looking back at me, and it's smiling. Number 342. Someone had slipped an envelope under my door in the night, and when I open it, I find a piece of paper inside, torn from a book. I'm holding it up next to my face. My eyes are puffy. You can just about make out the letters. It says, "The Mad Jesuit, Father Alphonse, in his 16th century manuscript, Umbra Autem Extempore, first wrote of the curious properties of a certain kind of light, or rather shadow, or shadows. It is unclear in view of sometimes contradictory translations. He wrote the manuscript while incarcerated in a monastery in the bogs of Scotland, where he was held for blasphemy for several years. In it, he describes a device which he claimed to have constructed, a sort of optical instrument or camera obscura, that is to say, a dark chamber for the capture of such anti-light or shadows, or possibly in some translations, notably the French manuscript of 1653, a soul. The mad Jesuit committed suicide, or perhaps was killed. The record is obscured by falling from the top of the monastery to the bogs down below. How he made his way from the stout walls of the cellars that imprisoned him to the top undetected. It's unclear, nor was there any sign of the device found after his death. Though he himself was eventually found and buried, for many months afterwards, local peasants reported the unsettling sight of a man answering Father Alphonse's description, being seen far and wide, sometimes in the midst of night, sometimes plainly in the light of day. But the figure never spoke, or if it had, none had recorded its words. I don't know what that means. It's gibberish. Number 655. It's blurry because my hand is shaking so much and you can't make out anything. Number 415. Farnsworth again. I point the phone at him and he shrieks and runs away before I can take his picture, so I take mine instead. Number 416. And another. Number 417. And another. Number 418. And another, and with each one I feel better and worse, like I'm being cut up into a lot of tiny pieces, like bits of me are lost, like there is me and me and me and me and another. Number 12, standing in the park in the sunshine with my new phone, and I'm so happy, and everything is going to be all right. Number 469, me with a crying face, dark. I have red eyes. It's night, and I've just been woken. Farnsworth is outside shouting, and Ikari is a spirit torn from your soul by a curse who now lives independently. In some cultures, they believe that every photo takes away a bit of your soul. I'll pay you anything, he says. I can hear a dog barking. Give it to me. His voice is so lonely and so desperate. Then the dog stops barking suddenly, and Farnsworth gives a high-pitched shriek. I don't have to look outside to see what he sees. Number 652, outside the supermarket. Number 653, I go into the supermarket and I bump into another customer and I mumble, sorry. And then when I look just for a second, she looks back at me and she smiles with my face. Number 654, my hand is shaking. A shot of me against supermarket shelves. Shoppers pushing carts loaded with food and cans and cereal. One by one, they stop, raise their heads and look up at me. They smile with my face. They have no eyes. Someone whispers my name. Ellie. Ellie. I run. Number 729. In one of the last pictures, I'm running. The road spreads out ahead of me in the sleeping suburban homes. The moonlight is sucked into the asphalt. I run. The only sound, the beating of blood in my head. The air is scented with jasmine. Ahead of me is the old playground where we used to play. I don't look back when I take the picture, but I know they're there.
I will be reading a story published by Stephen King in 1968 called Strawberry Spring. Spring-heeled Jack. I saw those two words in the paper this morning, and my God, how they take me back. All that was 8 years ago, almost to the day. Once, while it was going on, I saw myself on nationwide TV, the Walter Cronkite Report. Just a hurrying face in the general background behind the reporter, but my folks picked me out right away. They called long distance. My dad wanted my analysis of the situation. He was all bluff and hearty and man-to-man. My mother just wanted me to come home. But I didn't want to come home. I was enchanted. Enchanted by that dark and mist-blown strawberry spring, and by the shadow of violent death that walked through it on those nights 8 years ago. The shadow of Spring-heeled Jack. In New England, they call it Strawberry Spring. No one knows why. It's just a phrase the old-timers use. They say it happens once every 8 or 10 years. What happened at New Sharon Teachers College that particular Strawberry Spring? There may be a cycle for that too, but if anyone has figured it out, they've never said. At New Sharon, the Strawberry Spring began on 16th of March in 1968. The coldest winter in 20 years broke on that day. It rained and you could smell the sea 20 miles west of the beaches. The snow, which had been 35 inches deep in places, began to melt, and the campus walks ran with slush. The Winter Carnival snow sculptures, which had been kept sharp and clear-cut for 2 months by the sub-zero temperatures, at last began to sag and slouch. The caricature of Lyndon Johnson in front of the Tep fraternity house cried and melted tears. The dove in front of Prashner Hall lost its frozen feathers, and its plywood skeleton showed sadly through in places. And when night came, the fog came with it, moving silent and white along the narrow college avenues and thoroughfares. The pines on the wall poked through it like counting fingers, and it drifted slow as cigarette smoke under the little bridge down by the Civil War cannons. It made things seem out of joint, strange, magical. The unwary traveler would step out of the juke-thumping, brightly lit confusion of the grinder, expecting the hard, clear starriness of winter to clutch him, and instead he would suddenly find himself in a silent, muffled world of white drifting fog, the only sound his own footsteps and the soft drip of water from the ancient gutters. You half expected to see Gollum or Frodo and Sam go hurrying past, or to turn and see that the grinder was gone, vanished, replaced by a foggy panorama of moors and yew trees, and perhaps a druid circle or a sparkling fairy ring. The jukebox played Love is Blue that year. It played Hey Jude endlessly and endlessly. It played Scarborough Fair. And at 10 minutes after 11 on that night, a junior named John Dancy, on his way back to his dormitory, began screaming into the fog, dropping books on and between the sprawled legs of the dead girl lying in a shadowy corner of the Animal Sciences parking lot. Her throat cut ear to ear, but her eyes open and almost seeming to sparkle as if she had just successfully pulled off the funniest joke of her young life. Dancy, an education major and a speech minor, screamed and screamed and screamed. The next day was overcast and sullen, and we went to classes with questions eager in our mouths. Who? Why? When do you think they'll get him? And always a final thrilled question. Did you know her? Did you know her? Yes, I had an art class with her. Yes, one of my roommate's friends dated her last term. Yes, she asked me for a light once in the grinder. She was at the next table. Yes, oh yes, We all knew her. Her name was Gail Kerman, pronounced Kerman. And she was an art major. She wore grainy glasses and had a good figure. She was well liked, but her roommates had hated her. She was never gone out much, even though she was one of the most promiscuous girls on campus. She was ugly, but cute. She had been a vivacious girl who talked little and smiled seldom. She had been pregnant, and she had had leukemia. She was a lesbian who'd been murdered by her boyfriend. It was Strawberry Spring, and on the morning of 17th of March, we all knew Gail Kerman. Half a dozen state police crawlers crawled onto the campus, most of them parked in front of Judith Franklin Hall, where the Kerman girl had lived. On my way past there to my 10 o'clock class, I was asked to show my student ID. I was clever. I showed him the one without the fangs. Do you carry a knife? The policeman asked cunningly. Is it about Gail Kerman? I asked, after I told him that the most lethal thing on my person was a rabbit's foot keychain. What makes you ask? He pounced. I was 5 minutes late to class. It was Strawberry Spring, and no one walked by themselves through the half-academical, half-fantastical campus that night. The fog had come again, smelling of the sea, quiet and deep. Around 9 o'clock, my roommate burst into our room, where I had been busting my brains on a Milton essay since 7. They caught him, he said. I heard it over at the grinder. From who? I don't know, some guy. Her boyfriend did it. His name is Carl Emelara. I settled back and, relieved and disappointed. With a name like that, it had to be true. A lethal and sordid little crime of passion. Okay, I said, that's good. He left the room to spread the news down the hall. I reread my Milton essay, couldn't figure out what I'd been trying to say, tore it up and started again. It was in the papers the next day. There was an incongruously neat picture of Emelara, probably a high school graduation picture, and it showed a rather sad-looking boy with an olive complexion and dark eyes and pockmarks on his nose. The boy had not confessed yet, but the evidence against him was strong. He and Gail Kerman had argued a great deal in the last month or so, and had broken up the week before. Emelara's roomie had said he'd been despondent. In a footlocker Under his bed, police had found a 7-inch hunting knife from Ella Bean and a picture of the girls that had apparently been cut up with a pair of shears. Beside Emilar's picture was one of Gail Kerman. It blurrily showed a dog, a peeling lawn flamingo, and a rather mousy blonde girl wearing spectacles. An uncomfortable smile had turned her lips up, and her eyes were squinted. One hand was on the dog's head. It was true then. It had to be true. The fog came in again that night, not on little cat's feet, but in an improper silent sprawl. I walked that night. I had a headache, and I walked for air, smelling the wet, misty smell of the spring that was slowly wiping away the reluctant snow, leaving lifeless patches of last year's grass bare and uncovered, like the head of a sighing old grandmother. For me, that was one of the most beautiful nights I can remember. The people I passed under the haloed streetlights were murmuring shadows, and all of them seemed to be lovers, walking with hands and eyes linked. The melting snow dripped and ran, and from every dark storm drain the sound of the sea drifted up, a dark winter sea now strongly ebbing. I walked until nearly midnight, until I was thoroughly mildewed, and I passed many shadows, heard many footfalls clicking dreamily off down the winding paths. Who is to say that one of those shadows was not the man or the thing that came to be known as Spring-Heeled Jack? Not I, for I passed many shadows, but in the fog, I saw no faces. The next morning, the clamor in the hall woke me. I blundered out to see who had been drafted, combing my hair with both hands and running the fuzzy caterpillar that had craftily replaced my tongue across the dry roof of my mouth. "He got another one," someone said to me, his face pallid with excitement. "They had to let him go." "Who go?" "Emilara," someone said gleefully. "He was sitting in jail when it happened." "When what happened?" I said patiently. Sooner or later I would get it. I was sure of that. "The guy killed somebody else last night, and now they're hunting all over for it." "For what?" The pallid face wavered in front of me again. "Her head. Whoever killed her took her head with him." New Sharon isn't a big school now, and it was even smaller then, the kind of institution the public relations people chummily refer to as a community college. And it really was like a small community, at least in those days. Between you and your friends, you probably had at least a nodding acquaintance with everybody else and their friends. Gail Kerman had been the type of girl you just nodded to, thinking vaguely that you'd seen her around. We all knew Anne Bray. She had been the first runner-up in the Miss New England pageant the year before, her talent performance consisting of twirling a flaming baton to the tune of "Hey, Look Me Over." She was brainy, too. Until the time of her death, she had been editor of the school newspaper, a once-a-week rag with a lot of political cartoons and bombastic letters, a member of the Student Dramatic Society, and a president of the National Service Sorority, New Sharon branch. In the hot, fierce bubblings of my freshman youth, I'd submitted a column idea to the paper and asked for a date, turned down on both accounts. And now, she was dead. Worse than dead. I walked to my afternoon classes like everyone else, nodding to people I knew and saying hi with a little more force than usual, as if that would make up for the close way I studied their faces, which was the same way they were studying mine. There was something dark among us, as dark as the paths that twisted across the mall or wound among the 100-year-old oaks in the quad in the back of the gymnasium. As dark as the hulking Civil War cannons seen through a drifting membrane of the fog. We looked into each other's faces and tried to read the darkness behind one of them. This time the police arrested no one. The Blue Beetles patrolled the campus ceaselessly on the foggy spring nights of the 18th, 19th, and 20th, and spotlights stabbed into the dark nooks and crannies with an erratic eagerness. The administration imposed a mandatory 9 o'clock curfew. A foolhardy couple discovered necking in the landscape bushes north of the Tate Alumni Building were taken to the New Sharon police station and grilled unmercifully for 3 hours. There was a hysterical false alarm on the 20th when a boy found unconscious in the same parking lot where the body of Gail Kerman had been found. A gibbering campus cop loaded him into the back of his cruiser and put a map of the county all over his face without bothering to hunt for a pulse and started toward the local hospital, siren wailing across the deserted campus like a seminar of banshees. Halfway there, the corpse in the back seat had risen and asked hollowly, "Where the hell am I?" The cops shrieked and ran off the road. The corpse turned out to be an undergrad named Donald Morris, who had been in bed the last 2 days with a pretty lively case of the flu. Anyway, he fainted in the parking lot on his way to the grinder for a bowl of soup and some toast. The days continued warm and overcast. People clustered in small groups that had a tendency to break up and reform with surprising speed. Looking at the same set of faces for too long gave you funny ideas about some of them, and the speed with which rumors swept from one end of the campus to the other began to approach the speed of light. A well-liked history professor had been overheard laughing and weeping down by the small bridge. Gail Kerman had left a cryptic 2-word message written in her own blood on the blacktop of the Animal Sciences parking lot. Both murders were actually political crimes, ritual murders that had been performed as an offshoot of the SDS to protest the war. This was really laughable. The new Sharon SDS had 7 members. One fair-sized offshoot would have bankrupted the whole organization. This fact brought an even more sinister embellishment from the campus right-wingers, outside agitators. So, during those weird, warm days, we all kept our eyes peeled for them. The press, always fickle, ignored the strong resemblance of our murder bore to Jack the Ripper, and dug further back, all the way to 1819. Anne Bray had been found on a soggy path of ground some 12 feet from the nearest sidewalk, and yet there were no footprints, not even her own. An enterprising New Hampshire newsman with a passion for the arcane christened the killer Spring Heel Jack after the infamous Dr. John Hawkins of Bristol, who did five of his wives to death with odd pharmaceutical knickknacks. And the name, probably because of that soggy yet unmarked ground, stuck. On the 21st, it rained again, and the mall and quadrangle became quagmires. The police announced that they were assaulting plainclothes detectives, men and women, about, and took half the police cars off duty. The campus newspaper published a strongly indignant, if slightly incoherent, editorial protesting this. The upshot of it seemed to be that, with all sorts of cops masquerading as students, it would be impossible to tell a real outside agitator from a false one. Twilight came and fog came with it, drifting up the tree-lined avenue slowly, almost thoughtfully, blotting out the buildings one by one. It was soft, insubstantial stuff, but somehow implacable and frightening. Spring Heel Jack was a man. No one seemed to doubt that, but the fog was his accomplice, and it was female, or so it seemed to me. It was as if our little school was caught between them, squeezed in some crazy lover's embrace, part of a marriage that had been consummated in blood. I sat and smoked and watched the lights come on in the growing darkness and wondered if it was all over. My roommate came in and shut the door quietly behind him. "It's going to snow soon," he said. I turned around and looked at him. "Does the radio say that?" "No," he said. "Who needs a weatherman? Have you ever heard of the Strawberry Spring?" "Maybe," I said, "a long time ago. Something grandmothers talk about, isn't it?" He stood beside me, looking out at the creeping dark. "Strawberry Spring is like Indian summer," he said, "only much more rare. You get a good Indian summer in this part of the country once every 2 or 3 years. A spell of weather like we've been having is supposed to come only every 8 or 10. It's a false spring, a lying spring. My own grandmother used to say Strawberry Spring means the worst norther of the winter is still on the way, and the longer this lasts, the harder the storm." "Folk tales," I said, "and never believe a word." I looked at him. "But I'm nervous. Aren't you?" He smiled benevolently and stole one of my cigarettes from the open pack on the window ledge. I suspect everyone but me, and thee," he said, and then the smile faded a little. "And sometimes I wonder about you. Want to go over to the Union and shoot some 8-ball? I'll spot you 10. Trig prelim next week. I'm going to settle down with a magic marker and a hot pile of notes." For a long time after he was gone, I could only look out at the window. And even after I had opened my book and started in, part of me was still out there, walking in the shadows where something dark was now in charge. The night that Adele Parkins was killed, 6 police cars and 17 collegiate-looking plainclothes men, 8 of them were women imported all the way from Boston, patrolled the campus. But Spring Heel Jack killed her just the same, going unerringly for one of our own. The false spring, the lying spring, aided and abetted him. He killed her and left her propped behind the wheel of her 1964 Dodge, to be found the next morning and they found part of her in the back seat and part of her in the trunk. And written on the windshield, this time fact instead of rumor, were 2 words: ha ha. The campus went slightly mad after that. All of us and none of us had known Adele Parkins. She is one of those nameless, harried women who'd worked the breakback shift at the grinder from 6 to 11 at night, facing hordes of hamburger-happy students on study break from the library across the way. She must have had it relatively easy those last 3 foggy nights of her life. The curfew was being rigidly observed, and after 9, the grinder's only patrons were hungry cops and happy janitors. The empty buildings had improved their habitual bad temper considerably. There's little left to tell. The police, as prone to hysteria as any of us and driven against the wall, arrested an innocuous homosexual sociology graduate student named Hanson Gray, who claimed he could not remember where he had spent several of the last lethal evenings. They charged him, arraigned him, let him go scampered hurriedly back to his native New Hampshire town after the last unspeakable night of the Strawberry Spring when Marcia Curran was slaughtered on the mall. Why she had been out and alone is forever beyond knowing. She was a sad, pretty thing who lived in an apartment in town with 3 other girls. She had slipped on campus as silently and as easily as Spring Heel Jack himself. But what brought her? Perhaps her need was as deep and as ungovernable as her killers, and just as beyond understanding. Maybe a need for one desperate and passionate romance with the warm night, the warm fog, the smell of the sea, and a cold knife. That was on the 23rd. On the 24th, the president of the college announced that spring break would be moved up a week, and we scattered, not joyfully, but like frightened sheep before a storm, leaving the campus empty and haunted by the police and one dark specter. I had my own car on campus, and I took 6 people downstate with me, their luggage crammed in helter-skelter. It wasn't a pleasant ride. For all any of us knew, Spring Heel Jack might have been in the car with us. That night, the thermometer dropped 15 degrees, and the whole northern New England area was belted by a shrieking northerner that began in sleet and ended in a foot of snow. The usual number of old duffers had heart attacks shoveling it away, and then, like magic, it was April, clean showers and starry nights. They called it Strawberry Spring. God knows why, and it's an evil, lying time that only comes once 8 or 10 or so years. Spring Heel Jack left with the fog, and by early June, campus conversation had turned to a series of draft protests and a sit-in at the building where a well-known napalm manufacturer was holding job interviews. By June, the subject of Spring Heel Jack was almost unanimously avoided, at least allowed. I suspect there were many who turned it over and over privately, looking for the one crack in the seamless egg of madness that would make sense of it all. That was the year I graduated, and the next year was the year I married. A good job in a local publishing house. In 1971, we had a child, and now he's almost school age. A fine and questing boy with my eyes and my wife's mouth. Then, today's paper. Of course I knew it was here. I knew it yesterday morning when I got up and heard the mysterious sound of snowmelt running down the gutters, and smelled the salt tang of the ocean from our front porch, 9 miles from the nearest bench. I knew Strawberry Spring had come again when I started home from work last night and had to turn on my headlights against the mist that was already beginning to creep out of the fields and hollows, blurring the lines of the buildings and putting fairy halos around the street lamps. This morning's paper says a girl was killed on the New Sharon campus near the Civil War cannons. She was killed last night and found in a melting snowbank. She was not all there. My wife is upset. She wants to know where I was last night. I can't tell her because I don't remember. I remember starting home from work, and I remember putting my headlights on to search my way through the lovely creeping fog, but that's all I remember. I've been thinking about that foggy night when I had a headache and walked for air and past all the lovely shadows without shape or substance. And I've been thinking about the trunk of my car. Such an ugly word, trunk. And wondering, why in the world should I be afraid to open it? I can hear my wife as I write this, in the next room, crying. She thinks I was with another woman last night. And oh dear God, I think so too.
I got a warning for a couple of you out there. I'm going to let you know. One of the things you kids mustn't do is have a mirror in your bedroom. One summer, Alice and her family took a vacation in a nice, quiet English cottage. And she decided to explore the cottage and went into a room at the end of the hallway. There, something tall was covered by a dark cloth. It seemed to whisper to her. Alice pulled off the cloth and discovered a tall mirror underneath. And then what she saw made her blood run cold. As Alice looked in the mirror, she saw a giant and fierce-looking creature standing behind her. It had sharp claws and teeth like knives, black eyes, and long arms that were reaching out to grab her. Alice spun around quickly, but there was nothing there. She told herself she must be imagining things and looked back into the mirror, and the horrible-looking creature was still there. It gnashed its jaws and drooled a little, as though it, too, was a tasty snack. Alice ran screaming from the room right into her mother's arms, and she told her mother about what she had seen in the mirror, and her mother smiled and stroked her head and reassured young Alice that monsters weren't real. Days passed and Alice did not return to the room with the mirror. Instead, she enjoyed walks with her family. And then one night, as Alice was about to get into bed, she glanced at herself in the bathroom mirror, and to her horror, the creature was standing right behind her. Alice looked around the bathroom but saw nothing. She ran to her bedroom and jumped into bed, and she pulled the sheets up, trembling with fear. But poor Alice, there was a small mirror in her room. It was a circular mirror that hung on the wall across from her bed. In it, Alice saw the creature moving closer to her. "Oh, you're not real," she screamed. But the creature kept coming. She crept out of bed and went to the mirror, determined to end the figment of her imagination. She was about to smash the mirror when the creature reached out its claws, grabbed her by the wrist. Alice struggled as she was pulled into the mirror. She squealed and squirmed, but the creature was too strong. When Alice's parents came back to check on her, they found only an empty room. If only they had looked in the mirror, they would have seen young Alice being eaten by the horrible creature. No one knows to this day what happened to Alice. Don't have a mirror in your bedroom. Well, that's one warning to you. Here's another one. Don't go walking in the woods. Yes, it happened to one man. He had decided to take a wilderness trip. He packed his bag and called ahead to hire a guide. And when he arrived at the site where he planned to enter the woods, he looked around, but there wasn't anyone there. He figured the guide was probably running late and took out his map to survey the area. After a few minutes, he looked up and saw a man standing on the edge of the woods wearing a large brimmed hat. The man in the hat was standing completely still and facing the woods. And the hiker thought he must be his guide, and there was no one else around. "Are you the one I'm supposed to meet here?" he asked. And the man in the hat only nodded. And the hiker figured he must be very social and shrugged. "Well, lead on then, lead on." And the man with the brimmed hat led the hiker into the forest. They didn't appear to be on any kind of trail, and the hiker wondered how the other man knew where he was going. After they'd been walking for a while, they approached the edge of a deep ravine. And as the man was afraid of heights, he asked his guide if there's a way they could take a different path that led away from the edge of the ravine. The man in the hat wouldn't look at the hiker, but only shook his head. He continued to lead the hike along the ravine until they got to the highest point. And there, the guide walked to the edge and stopped, staring across the ravine. He took a step forward and looked like he was about to fall in. Wait, the man cried, rushing in to save his guide. He tried to grab the guide to save him, but he passed right through him, falling into the deep ravine himself. So, there's the warning. If you ever walk in the woods and see the man with a brimmed large hat, please don't follow him.
This is a very short story by the great H.P. Lovecraft. It's called The Terrible Old Man. It was the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea. It is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally keep him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of East India clipper ships in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most of the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk who sometimes steal up to the house to peer in through the dusty panes. These folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in each a small piece of lead suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations as if in answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again. But Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane and whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry, in their way, for the lonely, unpopular old fellow whom everybody shunned and at whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business. And to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there's a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ritchie, Zanuck, and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ritchie and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman, whilst Mr. Zanuck waited for them and their presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in Ship Street, by the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds. Desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterward. Messrs. Ritchie and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone down upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ritchie and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. So they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zanuck as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously, he watched that narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Zanuck did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the walk inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man, leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Zanuck had never before noticed the color of that man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason the Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Ship Street, or certain especially inhuman cries probably of a stray animal or migratory bird heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was, by nature, reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth.
Yay!
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for our 2023 Spooky Stories. We're going to leave you with this thought. The last man on earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock on the door. And that was written by Frederick Brown and first printed in December 1948. We'll have a few more stories coming up this weekend as we lead into the final countdown to Halloween. And that's it. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful time. And thank you to all our readers for this evening. And go have fun out there, people. Thanks for joining us.